I'd like to open the next session, and I'll call the panelists on stage in order to discuss the innovation moonshots in the brain economy. So I'd like to call Niklas Blomberg from IHI, the International Health Initiative, Felicitas Riedel from the European Investment Bank, Dan Koppelkamm for Convergence Partner, Marco Mohwinckel from Tech2, and Chiara Varazzani from the OECD. And as my chair magically appeared, I'll go and sit.
All right. So welcome, everyone. So we're here to discuss innovation moonshots, and this panel should address a series of issues. We are definitely aiming at discussing investments, discussing challenges in the pathways from discovery to translation, but also to try and create and identify investable opportunities, but also discuss the financial instruments. And it's obviously extremely timely, since we have seen in the start of 2026 the launch of the European Partnership for Brain Health. So we see the real momentum, and we can certainly discuss how to advance that and escalate it. Other items for discussion could be the creation of innovation hubs, but also, and that's the first question that we would like to launch to you all, what is your vision for an investable moonshot, and what does it imply in order to be ambitious? I know that our thunder was slightly stolen by the previous speaker, but I'll simply invite you to be as bold as what they mentioned. And before we start, I need to announce that Felicitas could not make it, but it's Dana who is replacing her. So I don't know, Dana, if you'd like to get started.
Thank you, no pressure. I'm happy to be here today. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm speaking on behalf of Felicitas, who could not join today, but also the larger European Investment Bank and European Investment Bank Group. Together with Shiva, that was in the room earlier, we've been, she's right here, we've been joining the discussions around the topic. So I think I just want to put the context of where we're coming from as the European Investment Bank Group. We mobilized in the last 10 years around 100 billion euros invested in life sciences and health projects. So with highly innovative projects from more than 130 companies, and financing in general projects in the life science and health sector with an average of 3.5 billion per year. Equally in the education system, as we're talking about brain health and brain skills. And coming back to the question and the moonshot, I think the moonshot implies high risk. The time is there, and I think we've heard from so many people here today, last but not least our colleague from Texas, that the case sits there from some time. I think it's the level of risk, talking from a financial institution perspective, that makes it difficult to address. But I think the financial instruments shall be the ones that are willing, able to take these risks. And when the risk is shared between the private and the public sector, I think that's when we have a better chance. Because if we look into the research and development area, where we have initially the academia and then mostly the private sector taking the products from the university to the patient, it's one thing. But then when we talk about diagnosis and treatment, we get very much involved with the public sector that is taking on these investments. So I would say that we do have a large panel of tools to use even for financing these. We just need to sequence them rightly and give them the lens. I think that's the way to look at it, the brain lens, be it for health or education.
Okay.
I'll stop here for
Well, and definitely a couple of points we can come to. But Niklas, I'm tempted to give you the floor as we are discussing public-private collaboration, and maybe you can take advantage of that to explain the perspective you're coming from, as I don't think the room is familiar with the concept of the IHI and what it stands for.
Happy to. So, Innovative Health Initiative, we're a European initiative, a public-private partnership, so probably a bit upstream from what Dana was talking about. We fund research and innovation projects, and what we do is that we only fund in partnership with industry. So we match industry funding, it's co-funding. And I think one of the real key features there, it's not cash. This is about capabilities. So we are actually looking for partnerships in our projects where industry is contributing either with the engineering capabilities or the regulatory expertise or the innovation management, but often, and actually 50% of the industry contribution is experts. And so in our big projects, it's one of the few places where the scientists and the experts from competing companies are coming together to take on an ambitious project. And I think that's really what puts the initiative a little apart in the European funding family. And I think the idea is then very much to hand over to the sort of ambitions that Dana is talking about, and we have a couple of interesting examples. But coming back to the moonshot, perhaps, now I think when I look at the field, and we fund quite a lot of projects in the brain space, I think there are four areas that we are looking at. So the first one, and maybe this is, and I'll come back to the moonshot at the end. The first one is understanding, and I think Visha in the previous panel put it really well. There is a lot of things we don't really understand about the brain, and given that it's a personalized medicine approach first, there is a very large need to understand not only the brain diseases, but also the brain function and the prevention part. And so that leads me on to the second bit, which is really that prevention. And we have some very exciting projects looking at toolboxes compared in different European contexts. And I think that's perhaps an important part of the moonshot, is not only to think about people, but actually people in their environment. So in what context, socioeconomic, sort of physical context do we sit in? Because that have a large impact on the prevention. The third bit is, of course, the patient pathways. So how do we pick up early? What are the signs of either capability or decline, and how do we treat that? And so those patient pathways and understanding those are really fundamental for the fourth area, which is for Europe, and I imagine also for the US, is the cost. And so how will we deal with an aging population, and how do we understand the cost and the cost containment models here, and what are the innovative funding instruments? So I think that for me, those are four areas that are coming together in the moonshot.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much for that. Chiara, I saw you nodding at different times when both Dana and Niklas were speaking. Maybe you would like to go next?
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Chiara, and I work at the OECD. I lead the work on behavioral science in Paris. So a lot of the things that have been said really resonate a lot with me. And I think coming back to your initial point, which is, do we need a moonshot, and what kind of moonshot? The answer, of course, is yes, especially for Europe. But the more I listen to you, the more I hear there's a lot of capabilities in Europe. We are technically capable, so technology is there, the science is there. We had a magnificent panel just before on scientific discoveries as well. But one thing that I struggle to see and I struggle to hear today is a bottleneck that to me is very important, which is a failure in human behavior. So, of course, we can try to put a man or a woman on the moon, but of course, if we just come up with fantastic technologies, but then they don't work in practice, are not used both from the patient's side, but also from the clinician side, this is going to be completely useless. So putting a man or a woman on the moon is great, but we need to let them walk or let them do something. And this is ultimately a human behavior failure. So a couple of examples here, just maybe to make my point clearer. I remember a few years ago, for example, there was a very famous startup here in Europe, fantastic, I won't name it, but it was basically about improving our sleep and making sure that our sleep is restorative and improving cognitive functions. Something that I didn't hear a lot about sleep today, but definitely something very important. The startup was amazing. They attracted a lot of funds, breaking silos, and the technology was there. So I still have the headband. It's a portable EEG, a fantastic neurotechnology. It works. It increases slow brain waves during sleep and has cognitive impact. But at the same time, it didn't work at all because the human factor was not in. The feedback of the functioning wasn't there at all, and so I stopped to use it after a couple of months. And this happened all the time with neurotechnology. And so it was a failure, but it was not a technological failure. It was not a scientific failure. It was a failure with the humans. And this is something that it happens much more often than we think. And a couple of the other examples, I work more with governments and regulators. It comes from regulation. I don't know if you know, but now with new cars, at least in Europe, there's a mandatory requirement to have cameras installed in cars. So we'll have a monitoring system in cars looking at drivers, okay? And this will be mandatory. Of course, we think about regulation in terms of things that will be frictions in innovation. But in this case, think about all the leapfrogs that we can have in terms of neurotechnology by having cameras and like monitoring system to monitor attention in our cars. Well, the reality is that, for example, recently I was talking with someone working in a big car manufacturer, and they were saying that these cameras, what workers in this car company do, they put a tape on the camera, just because it's not something that, from the human perspective, it will be something that it will be easily acceptable. So again, when we come up with innovation or regulations, we don't think about the human aspect and to what extent is this feasible. So I worry that big moonshot in this space could be just a very expensive experiment, but not very well implementable in a way.
So a very strong focus on what sociologists called a couple of years ago the F human factor. So we can keep it in our list of bottlenecks. So we may come back to it later on. Marco, I'd like to turn to you, your vision of the moonshot and the form it can take.
Yeah, so first of all, I come from a perspective of being an executive, an operator, and very close to investors as well. So I don't think about this from a perspective of policy, although I appreciate the importance of changing frameworks at that level. First of all, I also wanted to say that neuroscience is undergoing a renaissance. And it is true that it has been underfunded historically, but it is also true that if you look at the last 2 or 3 years, there has been quite a bit of money flowing into the space, into neurodegeneration, into neurology, into neuropsychiatry, and there were some mega deals done actually by pharmaceutical companies in the last 3 years, totaling over 40 billion. J&J, AbbVie, BMS, they all came back, okay? And I think it was Ian who was saying that 8 out of the 10 pharma companies are still investing in neuroscience. So the narrative has changed, and I think it's positive to see that. But there are some categories that are more funded than others. So let's say drugs, okay. Neurotech, okay. Some categories within drugs, psychedelics and others, are really exciting and have attracted a lot of investment and a lot of hype as well. And there are some areas that are underfunded and are really struggling. And in that sense, and guess what? These are the new modalities. These are the ones, the technologies that are used to prevent, predict, promote. So all the things that we have identified as being crucial to bend the curve. Okay, and why is that? That is because there is basically an adoption problem, and there's no pathway to clinical adoption. So oftentimes there's no regulatory pathway, there's no reimbursement pathway, and there's a clinical adoption challenge here. And in Europe, and by the way, the Renaissance is unevenly distributed between the US and Europe and between these different categories, okay? So I think it's very concentrated in the US and in some categories and less so in Europe. Europe suffers from fragmentation. I mean, I'm stating the obvious here. So when we talk about, and we have evidence requirements that are quite frankly ridiculous in some cases for the risk benefit that we're talking about here. So I'm being deliberately a bit provocative here, but we should find really new ways of assessing these new technologies in ways that are more expedient and more, let's say, appropriate for the risk benefit that they carry. So when you ask me about moonshots, for me, the moonshot is really shortening this adoption cycle somehow and implementing new ways of assessing technologies, reimbursing them, outcome-based, all these things, and finding clinical infrastructure that can embed this, because all these technologies, as a standalone, don't find a home. They need to find a home in clinical infrastructure. So if you ask me the moonshot, can we fund clinical infrastructure at scale, on one hand, to find a home for these new technologies that don't have a regulatory and reimbursement pathways, and secondly, can we build frameworks, and maybe this is a policy question, and we've been struggling with this in Europe with drugs as well, for reimbursement and adoption. So that is the real moonshot, and because that will achieve scale, and will help us achieve scale, and therefore biggest impact possible.
All right, thank you. Dan, I forgot to mention you're coming here instead of Pascal, who provided an apology. But we are equally privileged to have you on this panel. So last but not least, I would say, for this first round of exchange on the vision for Moonshot, what's your perspective?
So yeah, my name is Dan Koppelkamm. I'm representing Convergence Partners. We are a venture capital firm that has been actively investing into neurology, psychiatry, and human flourishing for the last 5 years. And it's been quite an interesting journey. When we started talking to investors about this investment themes, they looked at us in disbelief, basically 5 years ago, because historically, I mean, this space has been a graveyard, for investors. It's been really difficult to develop, therapeutics, technologies, solutions were very limited. So we find it initially very difficult to attract institutional capital into our strategy. So what we did is basically start working with private investors and family offices that are purpose-driven. A lot of our investors, they've had mental or brain health issues in the family, so we're really keen to support this space. And this has been quite a good strategy for us. So we've now built a solid portfolio of nearly 15 investments, deployed more than 30 million euros through that, and have really proven that, I guess, there are success stories, in this space. I mean, some of our portfolio companies, one of them, Neurocare, is a German scale-up. They're now, at the 60 million euro revenue level, actively growing in the US. I think it's a very likely NASDAQ listing case over the next years. We're also invested in the leading Alzheimer diagnostics company called Neotive, which is again making huge strides in the US. And so I think we're now building, really this proof in the portfolio that there are success stories out there, and I think this will also attract, further investors. So for us, and I used to invest in the clean tech space before. It was very similar. So as soon as really exits are coming, the valuations, investors are seeing there's like solid money to be made in a space, the money will pile in. I'm really convinced. So I think we just need to be a little bit patient. But at the same time, we really need more support, also from the regulatory level, to incentivize institutional investors to put money into this space, right? Because brain health is so crucial for the whole European economy. So I think also institutional investors, they really need to make a contribution and really start backing venture capital investors like us with big money, because moonshots will require big money, right? We can't really have these incremental, financings that we've seen over the last years. We really need big money, and that's also why we are now moving from our, I guess, deal-by-deal investment approach to launching a fund. So we're targeting a €100 million fund, covering brain and mental health, and are now starting the fundraising for that and hope to attract also some institutional investors, especially as anchors.
But so I'll stay with you then, because Marco was mentioning the underinvestment in the space, but that we see is now moving positively and is curbed. Do we need specialized investment vehicles in order to boost the system, in order to see the surge that you are calling for?
Yeah, so I think there was one comment this morning that said there's a lack of really interesting companies in this space as yours. I fully disagree. I mean, there's such a wealth of startups, highly innovative startups, also later stage startups that have proven their technologies that just require now funding capital. So having a vehicle maybe provided by the European Investment Bank, right, to support VCs specifically for such success stories, co-investment scheme, or also some incentives for pension funds, institutional investors to actually look much more serious at this space. I mean, this is what we would require.
Mm-hmm. Dana, I'd like to invite you to react on that. Would the EIB be able to contribute to that? And if so, and what conditions, or what is the environment we should generate in order for it to happen?
Thank you very much. I'm very glad that you brought it up, because we think alike in this respect, but you also want to reconfirm what you just said. It's not that there are not enough companies and interesting companies, but I think what we see, and this also relates to the moonshot question previously, and I think our colleague from our German colleague from the United States made it very clear, is not also the academical excellence and the science and the research, is the ecosystem around it that needs to be invested in. And that's something that we're doing from us. In the last 3 years, coming back to very concrete examples like you all gave, I think I've seen, as I review every single financial proposal from our division, at least 4 or 5 companies with excellent technologies in the brain health area. Mm-hmm. So I disagree. When it comes to the financing, I think we all talk about different financial instruments, but it's how we use the existing tools that we have to give them the brain lens, or the brain economy lens, which is even larger than just the brain health lens. We have venture debt, we have private capital, we have co-investments, and this is a very powerful tool. Do we need to have a bond? I think I'm anticipated a bit. I think that's a very technical question. I think what I would like to call is the lens. Mm-hmm. It's the blending of the public and the private. How can we afford to do so much venture debt projects? Because we have a guarantee from the European Commission, which is public money. So this blending, either with the public or with the private financial institutions of any kind, I think that's one of the solutions that will allow us to do more in terms of the pure science and research and development, but also to do smarter when it comes to the entire ecosystem that we need to support with these investments. And we're more and more mission-based, mm-hmm. all of us, including the investors. So we need to remember the fundamentals, that the innovation and the research need to be done using the tools available to date, but in respect and addressing an unmet medical need. But we also need to keep in mind that there needs to be a financial benefit at the end. But how much and with what lens, I think that's where we can customize these tools that you've mentioned and for the right purpose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dana. Marco, you wanted to react?
I just wanted to reinforce this, because I don't think there's a shortage of capital. I don't think there's a shortage of capital to be deployed, okay? I think what you were mentioning is a problem of where this capital flows, and even you can be very ingenious on the instruments and be very innovative on blended financing models and all sorts of things. But what is the problem we're trying to solve for here, right? I mean, that is the question. Because if I'm hearing we are trying to solve for market failures, right? Essentially, what you're saying is there are solutions and technologies that I'm investing in, or I will never invest in because they don't give me a return on the investment in a reasonable amount of time, through your lens, from a VC lens. And I appreciate and I understand that. So if we're trying to solve for that, then okay, blended financing models may be the answer. But again, I go back to the problem of why wouldn't we want to invest in things that we know will give us a return on investment at a society level, but don't necessarily return on your criteria for investing as a VC, right? So there is a market failure there, right? I do appreciate that. And the problem is, again, that some of these solutions do not have there's too much uncertainty. They don't have a home, they don't have a path to market, they don't have a path to scaling. So either there's a regulatory path is not clear, the reimbursement path is not clear, the adoption path is not clear. I go back to that, because if there was one, capital will follow or will flow into areas where there's a clear pathway forward. Even if the pathway is long, capital is available, okay? So I just want to understand what is the problem we're trying to solve for here. Yeah. When we call for EIB investments or blended financing, why are we doing that? Are we correcting for a market failure or not? In my view, we need to correct for frameworks, okay?
Okay, but then I invite you to react, but then I would like to move to Niklas to address the other bottlenecks.
So I just want to address, or mention one, I guess, market failure, if you want to call it like that. So Europe is extremely fragmented when it comes to reimbursement systems, right? So it's really hard to actually scale products. So we actually decided to adopt a cross-border acceleration strategy early on. So we have a subsidiary in Hong Kong. So we've been actively taking companies to China, because China, especially when it comes to brain health, they're extremely driven, right, and ambitious. Because if you look at disease areas like Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's, I mean, the prevalence is a multiple of Europe, right? I mean, so it's a serious problem. So we've been, quite successful, doing this and really helping these European companies to go to these large homogeneous markets. Also Brazil, we're actually doing a lot of work now. Brazil has the second highest burnout rate in the world after Japan. So the government is, very actively implementing legislation to force employers, for example, to implement mental health monitoring systems for employees, right? So there's so many top-down initiatives in these other countries that we don't see in Europe, right? And I think this is really something that needs to change. And then, I think it will be easier also to really scale these companies here on their home turf.
All right, thank you for that. So if I understand, the financial issue is nearly solved. So let's concentrate on the other challenges. Niklas, you were alluding to the expertise that IHI is able to deploy. You mentioned a couple of elements, and I've got the feeling that they respond to some of the issues Marco and other colleagues on the panel were mentioning. So where do you see that the IHI can contribute to the generation of innovation frameworks in which, or that would become investable?
IHI or public-private partnerships, I think it goes beyond our particular one. So, I think we hear a story of two tales in a way. We hear a story of a lot of innovation, and there's a lot of exciting innovation, and we hear, we just talked about a story of bottlenecks to innovation. And I think, public-private partnerships are important in both areas. Innovation, it's about de-risking, but it's also about scale, and we have done a lot of sort of blended finance or syndication, but really I see it as strategic partnerships with philanthropic and industry, and so to bring in another perspective on the innovation. I think that's really interesting, and it allows you to do things at scale that no single funder and probably no single company would be able to take on. And so we're doing some very interesting work with Wellcome Trust in mental health and so on. But I think the other part of public-private partnerships that we've started to experiment with, and I think are really important, is addressing these bottlenecks to innovation, what Marco talked about. And so if we look in Europe, we're lagging behind in clinical trials. The solution to scale up there Well, it's partly with the companies, but it's also with national authorities, it's the European regulation, there are many actors. It's really a team sport. And so how do you bring together, and we have a set of projects looking at this around clinical trials. We have a project right now that's looking at regulatory sandboxes. I think that's really, really important. For many of the developments today, there isn't a clear regulatory path to approval. And actually, we work very closely with the Medicines Agency, who have a list. They are working to identify what they call regulatory science needs. So what is the science that we need to do today to be able to assess the products of tomorrow? And I think that's a really important area for public-private partnerships. And then I think reimbursement is perhaps not an area for public-private partnership, but a pathway to reimbursement. So understanding the patient journey, understanding how the products will be used, and how can you prepare the health systems to actually be ready to be able to absorb innovation. That, I think, is a really critical area. And we have a couple of really good examples in Alzheimer, looking specifically at those treatment pathways and comparing them between countries. Because Europe, as we said, is not one jurisdiction, it's 27 different countries. Health systems are regional. And so actually, to be able to find a scalable way for innovation partners, you need to drive these collaborations across countries to find a common way of approaching.
Thank you. I'm about to open the floor for questions, but so if you have one, think carefully. But before that, Chiara, I'd like to come back to you about what you were saying earlier on the notion of the human failure. As we are discussing technologies, we are discussing science, we heard from Jochen about AI. So, but where would you see solutions in order to advance this challenge that you have identified?
Thank you so much. I think just wanted to come back to the discussion for just a minute. And I think this panel is incredibly interesting, but at the same time, I have the impression that we are talking about different things when we talk about moonshot, in a way. So why the moonshot narrative, why is it interesting and why is it so rich, especially in the context of the brain economy? It's mainly because one thing that is incredibly important is to try to understand what success looks like in the brain economy. And it's true that success is not about how much money we will invest in the brain capital or in the brain economy, but what are we trying to achieve, coming back to Marco's point. And so I think in all your brains today, in this room, we might have different opinions about what would like to be the moonshot in the context of the brain economy, and I would love to read your in your heads, because I think there will be a lot of heterogeneity, but so interesting. In my opinion, like a moonshot, and it's like, without going into details, but it should be about having Europe, each of us, in a brain-positive economy. So having Europeans in that space. What does it mean? That's something that we could discuss. But definitely, I think it's important not to lose what success looks like, and not only talking about how much money we should invest in this. So coming back just to human factors, which is, I think it's on the other side of the spectrum. Let's not lose the kind of what success look like, but let's be real as well. So let's make sure that whatever investment decisions we make, we take into account the potential of behavioral failure. My job is to do this in policies. Okay, so prescribing antibiotics, for example, we have massive breakthroughs and results in trying to have doctors doing the right thing at the right time just by using social pressure, for example. So it's about changing behavior in a way that it's useful at large for society. And I think in neurotechnology, we could think about similar things. But just not wanted to lose sight of the bigger picture here. And I think this panel is really about making sure the big picture is clear in our head, irrespective of kind of technology and money.
Okay, thanks a lot. And so to answer your first initial call for finding a collective solution to the question you were asking, over to you. I saw Linda, you wanted to raise a question, and we have gentlemen at the back. So if we can have the mic. Okay, there is an issue with the mic, so you can use mine.
Thank you. Wonderful jump. Linda Jarnum, founder of Flow to Thrive. We're a brain health data as a service company. I have a question. 70% of risk is attributable, for cognitive disease, attributable to modifiable and controllable factors. We've talked a lot about solutions today, a lot about technology, medication, etc. And now we're talking about investments. What is the appetite, and how do we shift, and how can we direct funds towards behavioural change and the actual transition that we need across society that needs to take place way before we get to prevention and medication?
So I think it's a brilliant question, and it's a question about aligning incentives. Who pays and who benefits? That's how you shift. So right now, when we talk about prevention, preventative models are really hard because the way our systems are built. So where does the incentive align at best? Is in the patient, in the user, in the individual, in the person, right? So should we think about direct-to-consumer models? And if you're talking about behavioral change, it's hard, very hard. Behavioral activation is very hard. Sustained behavioral change is even harder. And we know it. But I would say those that have the direct interest in paying for it should be the ones that are benefiting from it. Because right now there's a shift. You can't ask the healthcare system to pay for prevention when the benefits are reaped by someone else downstream. And I think the budget structure is a rate limiting factor.
So maybe I can also add a comment.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, go ahead then.
Yeah. So I think it's really tying into this human flourishing theme, right? I mean, in terms of optimizing your physical, mental, spiritual, emotional health, right? This more holistic approach. And really targeting, I guess it's more of a B2C play, where people are willing to pay money for optimizing their brain power in a way, right? So there are some technologies out there, like, for example, sound healing related, right? Where you work with specific frequencies to optimize your brainwave patterns, right? And this takes you into states that you usually wouldn't be able to go into deeply meditative states, or highly concentrated flow states, really optimizing your performance. And I think this is adding a lot of sexiness to the space, right? Because now it's not just about treating disease, now it's really optimizing your brain power, right? And that's why also we included this as part of our investment strategy, because we're seeing a lot of interest, especially from the longevity crowd, right, to move into this. Beyond just the physical body optimization, but also optimizing actually your mental and brain performance.
Thank you. And Nick?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think while at least our institution is not so much in the area of public health and prevention and behavioral change, I want just to bring the perspective of how long we're living. And I think the data was presented earlier. So some of this behavior change needs to be supported at older age. And I think one aspect that we did not discuss at all today, or I was not in the room, sorry if that was the case, is what we call long-term care. That has a lot to do with what you suggested, behavioral prevention and brain health. So I think we as an institution have a focus on models that would support including behavioral change, but not only medical care, in order to get the best out of it at this age. Thank you.
Okay, Niklas?
So I don't want to end on a negative tone, but I really don't want to be Pollyanna-ish around this. And I think you're right. This is incredibly difficult, and I think it's very difficult for public authorities for a good reason, because it's very hard to run studies that show the sort of cost benefit and the health technology benefit of that type of interventions. And I think we see that playing out in Alzheimer right now. And there is there was the Cochrane review on on the new interventions. It's been a huge debate in the whole Alzheimer field. I know in Sweden there is a big investment from the Public Health Authority in brain prevention, which is, I think, receiving quite a lot of criticism because the clinical studies it's impossible to do placebo-controlled clinical studies, and so it's very easy to take down. And so this is a very difficult area, and I think it's perhaps one of the reasons why a large-scale moonshot type investment at risk is necessary, because you have to generate evidence and you have to look at alternative evidence. And we have a couple of projects in the area, but I don't think we should underestimate the challenge, and we really should look at what is it that can move the needles and help public authorities to adopt some of these promotion practices. And that could include some very innovative financing, such as social bonds and so on.
All right, thank you. We have another question.
Thank you. Thomas Spols. I'm with the Faculty of Remote Rural and Humanitarian Healthcare, and I'm going to ask you for really practical advice. When we talk about moonshots, I mean, I could see the moon. It was actually a really concrete problem to solve. And in our community, we try to deliver healthcare in the parts of the world, the non-urban parts, where it's much harder. We haven't spoken much about epilepsy in this Brain Summit, which has a huge economic impact from all age groups. It is linked also in later life, might be a link to Alzheimer's, where people that we think have dementia might actually have epilepsy. This comes up a lot. Technology has advanced. We can now do EEGs much faster, simpler, remote health. There's regulatory barriers. You can't do it across borders. The medical data cannot flow. We cannot prescribe, cannot get reimbursed. So if we would want to scale up this existing technology and make that case, from your experience, from your expertise, what would you tell a community that has existing technology that cannot get the funding to really scale up for all the barriers? Like, we've identified the barriers, but what is the solution? What would you tell me, my community, to do to actually take those EEG devices to the rural parts of Europe, to the rural parts of the global south, to start putting people on proven treatment and actually make a change?
I'll ask anyone answering to be relatively brief, because we are getting near to the end of our panel. Does anyone want to have a go at this one? Dana?
I'm probably the least qualified to talk, but as a former medical doctor, I cannot resist.
That's okay. You hold the mic, so you have the right to speak anyways.
I mean, there are plenty of mics. I can move it around. No, I think we also need to step back and look at the things from this perspective. Equally to the epilepsy technological advances, there are a lot of other areas where this happens, from diabetes to cardiovascular diseases to anything else, and they all face, the same issue to some extent, that not everything is available for everybody geographically and socially speaking. So how do you make the choice of what to provide? And I think that's where we need, we don't have to, but that's where the public system looks for the basics, but that's where the private for-profit or not-for-profit can come in and adjust for some of these technologies to get closer to the patients. I'm sure it's not satisfactory enough, but I think that's the reality that we're living in.
Okay. Who else would like to react to that? No one? So it's probably time to invite you, each and every one of you, to share maybe a word of conclusion. I'll probably propose that today we exchange one element, because there were so many issues raised in the conversation. It was really diverse and actually very rich. But if there is one thing that you go off the stage with, but which would be a source of inspiration and encouragement in your day-to-day work across all the many challenges that we have identified, what would it be? And I'll probably give you 30 seconds each. Who feels free, ready to get started? Marco?
Okay, so I'll give it a go. As I said, for me, it's a problem of achieving great impact at scale, means adoption at scale. adoption at scale is not happening because pathways are not clear. We need to find ways of harmonizing pathways for regulatory purposes, particularly for reimbursement purposes. Okay? And we need to think about innovative schemes where we can do joint procurement or joint HTA assessments or outcome-based contracts. Those are the things we really need to focus on to achieve impact at scale and adoption at scale.
Thank you. Niklas?
So I come back, I think it's about innovation, it's also about the bottlenecks to innovation and systematically work to remove those bottlenecks to innovation. But if we think about partnerships, I think there are three things to take away from our experience. And I think the first one, and it sounds trivial, but it's in our experience, it's the hardest, it's the right topic. Because everyone in big collaborations have an opportunity cost. You can go away and do it yourself. And so finding that sweet spot where you really want to drive things together, so find the right topic is really important. The second one I think about is capabilities, not cash. If you're bringing together organizations and people from different contexts, it's not about the money, it's about what capabilities they bring into the collaboration. And the third one is quite obvious, but also hard to get right. It's the platform for execution. You will need to deal with a lot of complicated and boring topics like intellectual property, execution, control, and reporting. And getting that platform right is really important for success.
Well, so much for the word of hope. So, Dana, you're next.
Thank you very much. I think we should stop making the case for the brain health only as a cost or a care issue, but more advocate for the brain economy, the impact on the society and the benefits we get from dealing with it this way. The partnership part already mentioned, and if this is a shared ambition, we should be able to measure, present it, and talk the same language about it. Last but not least comes the financing part, where I think we have enough tools that can be customized. And all of these tools will bring better or more money if we again are able to measure what we gain as an economic benefit out of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Chiara?
I'll be very short, just complementing things, but I really think that we should not forget about the behavioral part, so the behavioral change of everything. I heard way too much about technology and finance today. We should not forget about the last mile. We can get the man to the moon, but we should think and embed a behavioral science lens from the beginning, not as an afterthought, but really when you design things, being financial, the financial models, etc., or other neurotechnology solutions. So more human behaviors in the future, hopefully.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I believe the brain and mental health space has an image problem and an awareness problem. I think we all need to work together to raise awareness, how huge the opportunity is. We believe the next decades will be the decades of the brain. A lot of people are not aware that Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, the neurodegenerative diseases, will become the biggest costs for healthcare systems, over the next years, overtaking even cancer. I mean, it's crazy. Nobody knows about this. And also the mental health epidemic, it's going to get worse. It's rampant already, but it's going to get worse with the advent implementation of AI over the next years. So it's absolutely essential that we're bringing solutions to the market to solve these problems. And let's please work together and improve the image, of brain and mental health.
Well, thanks a lot, and thanks a lot, everyone, for your contribution this morning. Please join me in a round of applause for our panelists.